Hey, how's it going? This is the Ninja Video School, and you're watching the first video. How do you get started video editing, and what is the best software and hardware to use? A little bit about myself. My name is Frank. I've been working in film and video for about 7 years. I have a bachelor's in film and digital production, and I have my own company called Ninja Monkey Media. Um, we do all kinds of things like narrative films, commercials, documentaries, music videos, and our main thing right now is wedding films. So those are films of people's wedding day. And I think that's a very good way to get started editing videos, getting started editing wedding videos. And that's going to be the main thing that you're going to learn in this first part of this course. It's going to be geared toward that. I think it's a very profitable skill set, and it uses the full post-production skill set. It goes in from media ingestion and organization, creating a rough cut, through making a fine cut and pick lock, adding effects, different things like that, and dealing with revisions and notes. It's a great way to get started. You also work with audio, sweetening audio, dealing with on location audio, and also music and things like that, and mixing. It's a great way to just get a good grasp of the full post production skill set. Um, so, when you're starting to edit, one of the first things you're going to kind of be wondering is what kind of computer you're going to be using, right? Because that's the main tool that you're going to be using every day to edit. Um, the main question is whether you're going to be using a Mac or a PC. Um, Macs, in my opinion, are much more reliable. My last Mac, I edit on Macs. I always, when I first started, it was pretty much that if you wanted to be serious about editing, you were going to edit on a Mac. PCs were not really used that much. Some people that edited on Avid used them, and Premiere was used in somewhat for television and things like that. But if you wanted to be serious, usually people at that point were editing on Macs and they were using Final Cut Pro 7. So the first thing you're going to ask yourself when you start editing is going to be whether you're going to be using a Mac or a PC. The computer is your main thing while you're editing, so it's going to be one of your most important choices. In my opinion, Macs are much more reliable, and Apple hardware lasts much longer than what's available for PCs. Um, there is the Surface Pro and things like that. They are getting better, but it ends up coming down to the operating system. The operating system on Macs is much more reliable. It has much less bugs. You don't have to worry as much about viruses and things like that. Much more things are built in, where you don't need additional software to be able to get simple things done like screenshots and things like that. Where PC things might be a little bit more complicated for simple things that you might need daily as an editor. Macs were always made for editors. When I started um, editing about 7 years ago, it was if you wanted to be serious, you had to be on a Mac. I mean, it was there were a few editors on PCs using Avid and things like that in post production houses, but most things that you saw, most serious editors were using Macs. Ever since uh, Final Cut basically stopped Final Cut 7 and came out with Final Cut 10, things have kind of changed. A lot of editors weren't happy with that, so they started to switch from Macs to PCs. And also, Apple's been a little bit slow coming out with pro hardware, so they've lost a lot of pro users because of that as well. But in my opinion, PCs just not gonna last as long as a Mac. A Mac usually my last Mac was a 2010 iMac, 27 inch, and I was still using it up until about a year ago when I got my new 5K Retina iMac. And it was still, and I sold it for about $800. I was able to make money off of it on eBay, and someone's still using it today. It's still probably a reliable machine. A PC from 2010 would be a completely different story. It would be falling apart. You could upgrade it. You could upgrade the motherboard and things like that, upgrade the graphics card, but you're going to be spending a lot of money on that. It might be the amount of money you might spend buying another Mac, maybe a used or new, things like that. Um, so that's kind of the main reasons why I still use a Mac. I still use a 5K Retina. We'll talk about that a little bit later, what Mac I recommend and things like that. Um, so your next choice is going to be what kind of editing software are you going to use? Um, there's four major editing softwares that are being used right now: Avid Media Composer, Premiere Pro CC, Final Cut Pro X, and Resolve, DaVinci Resolve. Those are kind of the four editing programs. I've used them all. I'm become very familiar with all of them. I've taken the training in all of them. I've edited several projects in all of them. My favorite, in my opinion, is Final Cut Pro X. It allows you to do pretty much everything that you need to do all in one package. It has great audio stuff. It has great color correction, especially with their new release. Um, it allows you, it's much less buggy, it's much faster. Well, I used to edit everything in Premiere Pro, um, and I was editing my wedding films from Premiere Pro for several years, and I can pretty much edit a wedding film from start to finish in about half the time in Final Cut Pro X, and edit it much better and take more time on the artistic parts of the editing process, and much less time on Premiere basically crashing. One of the main problems with Premiere is that it's just not as reliable. Um, on a typical day when I was editing with Premiere every day, I would probably have it crash about 5 times. It's pretty much an average amount of times. It would always crash. It was pretty regular. I would always restart my computer always at lunchtime. So restart my project, restart the computer, just to make sure I got everything back to its starting state, so I wouldn't have to worry about it crashing as much. With Final Cut Pro, I really don't have to worry about that at all. If it crashes one time the whole day, that's a lot. It might not crash the whole week. The whole time I'm editing for a whole week, it might not even crash one time. Um, and there's several other advantages to it. I'm going to kind of show you right here. This is Final Cut Pro X. This is the newest version, Final Cut X 10.4, I believe. Let's take a look at that. I'm sorry about that. So this is Final Cut 10.4. Yeah, this is the newest one. It just came out like about a month ago. They've made a lot of refinements to the color panel, and they've done a lot to just make it a lot more reliable in general, just a lot faster. I'm sure on every Mac, definitely on my Retina 5K, it runs great. Um, you could see it runs very smooth, really no lag. Everything's running in real time. It's still running 4K quality. In Premiere, when you go over here, it's going to be right here. I'm at 1/4 of a quality. So that's basically what I have to do for it to be able to play at real time. It gets a little bit fuzzy, as you can see when you start playing it, but that's what the computer has to do to be able to play it at real time without dropping frames. Now, if I put it to full quality, so it looks pretty much as good as Final Cut Pro, it's going to be dropping frames. It looks jittery. So it's basically certain frames in between are missing. So it just looks jittery. It looks like things are freezing, kind of, you would say. Um, Final Cut has a lot more options than Premiere. As far as Premiere basically lets you lower the quality. For my computer, for 1080p quality, I would lower it to 1/4 of the quality so that I could play basically everything in real time. This has a bunch of effects on it. It has color grades on it. It has a film convert on it. Different things like full color grade. So this is the full pick lock of a documentary. Um, you can see right here, it's about an hour and 10-minute piece, and it has everything on it. Now, basically, I have to lower it to a 1/4 of a quality for everything to play correctly. Another thing that I have to do is basically save. So I have to save everything manually. You can command save or go right here to file save, and it'll save everything manually. It takes some time. This is time that you're taking out through your day saving. This could add up to maybe half hour, maybe an hour of time saving, waiting for it to save, especially on a big project like this. In Final Cut, basically, you never have to save. it will always be saving in the background. There is no save option for anything. You could export, you could save other things, but you can't save the project. It's just saving. There is backup options. You can choose where you want it to back up a backup file. But what I've always found is in the rare occasion that Final Cut does crash, it has already saved. So you're not going to lose any progress at all after it crashes. Usually a crash might happen, in my opinion, when I've had it crash is when you're dealing with external presets, plugins, things like Film Convert or Colorista, things like that. When you're using things that aren't built into Final Cut, you might run into a little bit more of crashing, but it really not that much, especially recently with the 10.4 update. They've helped a lot with that. Even 10.3 was very reliable. The last couple of editions have been very good. Um, Now, Premiere, um, you do have to save, obviously. Like I talked about, when it does crash, it does try to save it automatically. So when you open Premiere again, it will have tried to save your project automatically. But in my opinion, usually that doesn't, in my experience, usually that doesn't work very much. Out of 10 times, maybe one or two times, you actually have your project saved. So you want to be saving all the time. It does. It does an auto save. There's a preference for auto save. Right now I have it for 15 minutes and 20 maximum versions. You want to have a lot of versions so that it doesn't run out of versions, and just in case you have to go back for whatever reason, that's something that is always very helpful in Premiere. You might want it to be saved even less time, maybe 5 minutes, um, depending on how long your project is, how long it takes for it to save. You might spend a lot of time just saving. So you don't want to set the time too low. That's going to be one of your major decisions. Usually I'll set it about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. That's a good time frame to have it save. For Final Cut, you don't have to worry about any of that. Right now I have it set to proxy media, so basically everything looks like it's full quality, but it's a little bit lower quality than it really should be. There are 4K clips, the 4K 23.98 frames per second, and I have it set to the proxy mode. The quality gets a little bit lower, but not as blurry as Premiere will get when you set it to 1/4. Everything pretty much looks exactly like it should, but it's not the full sharpness as if you set it to optimize original. A optimized original basically is taking the original clips, and you have a couple options there. You can set it to better performance or better quality. Um, that's really your decision. Better performance will kind of, in a way, blur it a little bit when you're starting to press play, so you're not getting the full quality. So it's kind of trying to do what Premiere is doing, or better quality. Better quality will keep that 4K quality, but when you're dealing with something like this that I've color graded, added effects, and things like that, you're gonna be dropping frames, especially a 4K clips and things like that, unless you have a very powerful machine. And I don't think it's necessary to be editing at that full quality. You're gonna be basically fighting with your machine the whole time. You're gonna be fighting with how powerful your machine is. You're gonna be having to upgrade your machine more often than you need to. But using the proxy mode, you can basically just flip that over. It takes a little bit of time to convert the clips, and you're going to be using hard drive space. But in the end, you're just going to have a lot more options creatively. You're not going to be fighting your computer. Everything's going to just run perfectly. Um, it's just going to give you a lot more liberty. In my opinion, that always helps. And you're not going to have to spend as much money on a more powerful computer. Um, one of the next things I wanted to talk about is how Final Cut basically, one of the main reasons that people are not switching over to Final Cut X at this point is because Premiere basically has much smaller file sizes. Final Cut might have a 100 GB file size versus a 100 MB file size for Premiere. So that could make a big difference for a lot of editors when you're editing big projects and things like that. I'll let you take a look at kind of how my projects will look right now. Um, so these are my Final Cut Pro project files. Um, these two are projects, these are two documentary length projects that they do not have the proxy option, and basically they'll be about 6 GB in file size. You can make them a little smaller if you get rid of a little bit of the external files. You can see these are about 400 MB, 900 MB, Um, the file is going to be about a gigabyte you would expect for each of these Final Cut Pro projects. Now, if you're using the proxy setting, that's going to use a lot more. That's going to use about 70 gigabytes for my wedding films, which are basically, they end up being about 250 gigabytes of 4K footage. So it converts it down into 70 gigabytes of ProRes. um, it plays very nice on any Mac. Usually, any Mac after 2012 play really nice on. As long as you're running the newest Mac OS, you'll probably be okay with these proxies. But as you can see, it takes up a lot more file size. Each of these is about 70 gigabytes, maybe up to 100 gigabytes. So that's going to take up a lot more space. I really don't mind it because it file uh, disk sizes have gotten so much bigger and hard drives have gotten so cheap. You can basically get a 5 terabyte hard drive for about $80 to $90 on B&H or Amazon, and probably with free shipping as well. And it's just, it's really not as prohibited to have these 100 gigabyte file sizes. And these are only while you're editing. So I have these all available to me just in case the brides send me, like this one I could basically get rid of right now. Shelby and Dead, these are all done, so I can basically blow these away and lower them to about a gigabyte. They don't have to be that big right now. That's some maintenance procedure that I do once I know that they're not going to have any more edits, and it's basically an archiving procedure that I do. I get rid of the proxy files because I don't need them anymore, and I also get rid of a few of the other files that you need in the while you're editing for Final Cut, and it lowers it to about a gigabyte. Like you can see, these have been archived, and then I make XMLs, and I put those XMLs in a Google Drive, and I back them up so that I basically have a backup of everything. You can see here Premiere files are going to be much smaller. This is a full documentary size project. It's 177 gigabytes, it's megabytes, I'm sorry, 177 megabytes. All these projects are very small. They can even be kilobytes in length and in size. Everything is very small, basically the size of XMLs. So you can see these are the Final Cut XMLs that I place in here just as a backup through Google Drive. I always like having backups of everything when I'm done with a project. I'll basically export XMLs of it and back it up somewhere else. You can see these green checks. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that, my media management, but the green checks are basically means it's been backed up to the cloud. Um, Now, let's see. So we've talked about a lot of the major benefits with having Final Cut over Premiere and why I choose it over Premiere. Um, we've talked about choppy playback, proxy mode, basically everything that I wanted to talk about. Now, you're probably wondering, which Mac do I really need? You hear this iMac Pro's coming out. Do I need that iMac Pro to be able to edit? Do I need, how expensive is this going to be? I would say any Mac that's running the newest Mac OS is going to be able to run Final Cut Pro X. I would recommend a MacBook Pro or an iMac. Um, it'd probably be better if it's after 2012. The newer, the better, obviously. You can get a used one on eBay, things like that. Um, you can get it much cheaper. Apple also sells certified used Macs, which can be very good. I recommend the right now the 5K iMac Retina. I don't really think you need the iMac Pro unless you're really trying to edit Premiere on a Mac. You're editing um, red footage, editing basically 5K to 8K footage. You want to edit it natively. You don't want to convert it and spend the time converting it because of maybe time frame issues. You don't have the time to convert it. Um, Even though converting, usually for a wedding, for me to convert all the footage to proxy, which would be a whole day of footage, that's an 8 hour shoot. I'm almost shooting constantly. I'll have about 4 to 5 hours of footage at the end. That takes maybe about 1 to 2 hours to convert it all. So it's not a lot of time. But some people don't have that time. They might have to edit it right to air, and they have to get it done. So that's probably why they need the 5K iMac. That's probably what I would recommend that for. I don't think most people would need it. Um, if you have any iMac, that's probably going to be good for you. The 27 is going to be better than the 21, obviously, for editing, but the 21 will make it do. And That's basically most of the things I wanted to talk about in this episode. Now you have a good basis of what software and hardware to use, how to get started, and the next episode that I'm going to be going into more into media management, how to manage the media, how to manage all these project files, how I name my project files, and different things that I do to manage my media to make sure that everything is backed up to industry standards and so that I don't lose anything and then everything is very organized and easy for me to search. So we'll talk and we'll talk soon, and hopefully you got some information that you needed out of this video. Thank you.